Hi, everybody. We are so excited to be here. I am Roshanda, the Rho Show live, Pratt, and I am a storyteller, live stream strategist, producer, and known as the First Lady of Visibility. And I get the opportunity to co host a powerful discussion with this beautiful lady here with me. Tameika, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, welcome everybody to this very informative interview and conversation. I am Tameika Isaac Devine. I am a wife, a mom, an attorney, also an elected official serving the citizens of the great, famously hot Columbia, South Carolina, as your at-large councilwoman. And I've had the pleasure over the last several months, Ro, to interview and invite and introduce to my circle of friends. The presidential candidates. As you know, South Carolina was first and South primary for the Democratic primary. And so we have had an opportunity to introduce a lot of folks to presidential candidates. And so I'm really, really excited today because we do have a presumptive Democratic nominee, but there is also an independent candidate for president that a lot of people don't know about. But you and I both have had the honor and privilege to know this amazing woman of God for many years. And so we think you and I have talked about this. I think it's very important that people know who all the candidates are and who all their options are. And so I'm excited to be here with you today to introduce our friends and our followers to Jade Simmons.
I'm excited too. We don't get an opportunity to spend time together like this, but what an honor to be able to have a conversation like this. So, how it's going to go, I want to say hello to those who are watching us live here on Facebook and also YouTube. Hello to those who are in the replay audience. We want to go ahead and tell you that this conversation is going to last about an hour. And so, we're asking you to go ahead and hit the share button, tag some of your friends and family to be a part of the discussion, or start a watch party and have a discussion with your friends and family. We're going to talk to Jade for about an hour. This is in no way us giving her our endorsement, but this is us giving you the opportunity to know of the other options that are available to you. And so we're asking you to hone in, lean into this conversation. And if you get an opportunity where you want to ask questions, there's going to be an opportunity for you to pose those questions in the chat section as well, because I'll be monitoring those too. So let's go ahead and get started, Tameika, shall we?
Definitely, definitely. So it is my honor and privilege to introduce you guys to 2020 independent presidential candidate Jade Simmons. Jade has led a life marked by innovation and reinvention. As a world-renowned classic pianist, top-ranked transformational speaker, and business leader, she's driven by a desire to influence and inspire people to be the biggest, boldest version of themselves possible, the version of themselves that stand to make the most impact. She intentionally partners with purpose-based companies and organizations who have track record of prioritizing the people who work for them and the customers they serve. She gets people to bring more of themselves to every single table, every single time. She'll do the same as president, fostering a new era of purpose-based public-private partnerships, unlike the merely one-sided transactional deals we're used to. She believes America has a unique calling and a powerful destiny. She believes in America First policies, but not in isolationist practices that keep us from being a true world leader we are destined to be. And she is also a South Carolina native. So I've got to say that for our South Carolinians who are watching. So it is indeed my honor and privilege to introduce you guys to Jade Simmons, 2020 independent presidential candidate.
Hey, ladies, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So glad to have you here.
I'll tell you what, I'm just listening to you and feeling again humbled and privileged. You know, it's hard out here for an independent. So I appreciate you guys giving me this airtime and trusting me enough to introduce me to your audience. So thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure and good to have you here. And welcome back home, even though it's just virtually.
That's right. I'll be home in a little bit. I'm a native of Charleston. So, you know, we South Carolina State.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here and really excited to get started. So let's start at the beginning, Jade. Why did you decide to run for presidential office now?
You said we only had an hour, so I got to think of the Cliff Notes version of that one. Here's the big distinction that I really want people to understand. This is not something you wake up and say, you know what? I think today I'm just going to run for president. It's not a career move. It has to be greater than a personal ambition. And I know we'll get into this later as well. My family and I have been discussing an entry into public service at some level. But if I'm being really honest, we thought the timeline was much farther along. And if any of you know what it's like to go and present your timeline to God and have him tell you that's not it, that's where I was. This was a moment where, when I looked at what was going on in society, something I always preach, I always teach, I always coach, is that if you keep finding yourself asking, where is the voice that's supposed to be saying this? Where is the person that's supposed to be doing this? You better be real careful, because you ask that question enough and you'll find yourself looking in a mirror. And I heard myself asking for solutions that in my heart I had, but I didn't hear anybody saying. And so it was a very difficult decision to make, to do it now. If I could have it my way, I would have planned and prepared it a much different way, a much longer timeline. But I believe we're living in such a time as this. We like to quote that, but you have to ask yourself, if this is this moment, then how do you add texture to that moment? Where do you fit in? And so, quite honestly, when I look at the things that I wanted to see done in this nation, I didn't see anyone else talking the way that I wanted to hear. And so I had to ask myself a very hard question, which was, is this the time versus the time I wanted? Is this the now? And the answer was yes. And it was one that my family backed me on, and my team as well agreed. It was a now moment and not a later destination. So that's why I'm here right now.
I love it. And we have a lot of people who are chiming in. Hello to everybody who's watching us live and in the replay audience and saying hello to us. Thank you, guys. If you're just joining us, do us a favor. Go ahead and hit the share button, start a watch party. Go ahead and invite people to be in the conversation, because after our conversation, you get an opportunity to pose questions as well. So thank you guys so much for doing that. Also, Jade's website, OperationRestoration2020.com, is scrolling at the bottom of the screen. So again, you guys could engage in that way. Don't go to the website now. You can do that after the discussion, but take note that is scrolling at the bottom of the screen as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Jade, let me ask you, can you share with the audience, what is your experience in politics?
So the question you're really asking is, have you done this before? Have you been a politician? Come on, we promise we're going to keep it real here. Here's the thing. I have never been a politician. And I say that proudly, because I happen to believe that this era, this moment, the last thing it needs is politics as usual. And I know right away people are saying, wait a minute, we tried that with Donald Trump. He wasn't a politician. We thought that he would drain the swamp. Well, I think we saw someone who jumped in and became one of the worst alligators in the swamp, right? But that wasn't the failures that you might see in this leadership have nothing to do with the lack of political experience. This is a question now about vision. It's a question now about servant leadership. And it's a question now about priority. And so the experience that I bring to the table, while it's not traditional in politics, I believe it's everything we need for the moment we have right now. If you think about what the president is required to do, it's three things. She must be the head of state. Head of state has to be a killer communicator. They have got to be able to talk and hear between the lines. They've got to be able to address multiple demographics without intentionally inserting division or lopsided agenda. If I'd come to you as a politician with 20 years experience in politics, I couldn't help but bring with me some baggage, some political debts that I need to pay, some donors that I have to make happy. That's just par for the course. If I came to you with 20, 30 years of political experience, it'd be very hard for me to shed hard rock ideologies. So we're coming now into a season where I believe it's not even enough to work across the aisle, that we need a leader that lives in the aisle, that is only looking for ways to prioritize people over politics, personal agenda, profit, especially personal gain every single time. So when you look at my track record of leadership that I know we'll get into, you'll see those characteristics. And that's why I can jump into this confidently, not feeling ashamed that I'm not coming to you as a seasoned politician.
So I mentioned before in your intro that, Rho and I actually got to know you really years ago, really because of we're all women of faith who are unapologetic and unashamed to let our faith lead us, but know that we can grow our businesses by leading with our faith and our relationship with God. So when anybody sees or hears you, they know that you are a strong woman of faith. Tell us, what role does faith play in your candidacy, and would it play in a presidential administration?
Yeah. You know, look, it's supposed to be political suicide. You don't talk about your religion. You don't talk about your faith. I already knew as an independent, I was going to ruffle a lot of feathers. Why not go ahead and do everything you're not supposed to do and hope that people who want something different will resonate with it? You're right. I am unapologetic in my faith. I am a Christian. I'm a hardcore believer in the Word of God, and I am personally guided by biblical principle. But I am ashamed right now. I'm ashamed at how Christianity has been represented in politics. I've watched scripture that I know and love be manipulated for the gain of power. I'm seeing actual morality be sacrificed for a moral agenda. So the reason I feel I have to be so vocal and unapologetic about my faith is so that people can see what it really looks like to lead from a faith-based perspective. It means that I, as a devout Christian with strong convictions, must, according to my religion, serve you and honor you, whether or not you believe like I do. I must protect you, whether or not you define marriage in the same way that I do. I must make sure you have resources that you need, whether or not I agree with your life decisions. That is how, to me, a faith-based ruler leads. And so I've been unapologetic about it because I think we have to see a different model of it. We have people who work with our campaign that don't believe God, that don't believe like I do. I had a behind the scenes session with a potential volunteer, and she said, I just need to know, how Christian are you? I said, we should definitely talk about that. And I said, what you're really asking me is, does my Christianity mean that the bulk of my tenure will be about taking away rights that you have? That's what you're really asking. And she admitted that was the truth. And so for me, I see leadership as ministry. When you ask, how will it guide my campaign? How would it guide the way that I would run the country? Leadership is a ministry. That doesn't mean that I'm preaching and proselytizing or trying to blur the lines between church and state, but it means that I must be first and foremost in service to the American people. So I'm looking to make people's lives more powerful, less painful, more peaceful, more prosperous. And I think for you to understand where my source is going to be critical. I think with the current president and with many potential candidates, we don't check their source. When you check their source and you see how they are inspired and how they are guided, it will not be a mystery how they will lead. And I think we have to be better at that as voters, and not just going for party lines, but saying, let me check the heart and the mind of people who are vying to lead us.
Jade, the theme of today's talk is we've prayed, we've protested, now what? Being a Carolina girl, native to Charleston, South Carolina, we just yesterday honored the victims of Mother Emanuel, the 5-year anniversary of that tragic shooting that happened in Charleston, South Carolina. With everything that is going on in our world and in our country, globally, and on the cusp of that anniversary, what do you think is next for our country?
First, let me say, we came up with that title together. I do not like when people say, well, all we can do is pray, because that means they do not understand the intense power and capacity of prayer. I also don't like when people say, well, we should just pray and not put any action behind it, because faith without works is dead. So let me just start by saying we must pray, we must protest. You're talking to the daughter of a civil rights activist who's been on the streets protesting since the 60s and 70s. He never left the streets. My father took me with him to KKK rallies so I could look hate in the face and understand what it was like. So I understand the power and need for protest. My father always says he's the angry Black man, so I don't have to be, that I can have access to places that he wouldn't, that just his sheer anger and outrage wouldn't allow him access to. But I do believe we have to look at what is next now. What I'm concerned about is in the beauty of this moment. Yes, this is a beautiful, ugly moment where we're watching people have to scream at the top of their lungs. We're watching things we don't like to see in terms of the looting and the violence, but we have to understand the symbolism of this moment. You're seeing things burn because there are systems that need to be burned down to the ground. You are seeing people so-called act like animals in response to being treated like animals. So I think we have to first have an honest conversation. And this is not a conversation about relationships. I was talking to someone who was saying she has her white friend are just feeling some type of way because first of all saying, I'm so tired, I don't want to talk about this anymore. It's been 3 weeks. And it's kind of like, it's been 300 years. It's not just been 3 weeks. But she was also saying in these very important relationships with people who are other than Black, what's happening is people are thinking the relationships are on trial. That when they hear us now speak out as Black women and say, there is systemic racism, they're translating that as us calling them racist. This is not about relationships now. We have to now move to outcomes. So one of the first things we do, aside from having difficult, real conversations, I believe we have to begin to deconstruct injustice in all of its forms. If we leave this at police brutality, we've missed the mark. If we leave systemic racism at a war between law enforcement and civilians, which it should not be, we've missed the mark. We've got to now look at the systemic effects on education and on the economy, and we've got to draw a full circle picture to actually see us evolve from this moment. So, I know we only have the hour, but I'll give you just a few of the things that I think we need to focus on where police brutality and law enforcement are concerned. I think it goes without debate. It should go that we must end qualified immunity. I think we have to make it much easier to fire bad apples, but I think we must not limit the conversation to bad apples. We're talking about a bad system, and we have to root out the good old boy network. I have friends who are law enforcement, and they will say, nobody hates bad cops more than good cops. So I think it is a mistake to take good cops out of the conversation. We must be working in tandem with these different police chiefs who are already making revolutionary moves. I do believe we have to have officers paying for their own trials. You can put the conversation on black and white, but when you turn it on green, you find common ground a lot quicker. So you make them pay for their own trials. I think we have to rewrite many of the obscure laws that we have that enable wrongful arrest and cover-ups. There are police who will say the way that some of the laws are written, it would be very difficult to go back and see where injustice was had. And I think we do have to have retraining of our law enforcement officials. We have to have reevaluation. We need checkpoints in there to see if people are still doing good. I always say, when you look at the video with Derek Chauvin and his neck on George Floyd, pay attention to the 3 other officers. You see, we were lazy. We dismissed that as just they were also racist. But we have to ask ourselves, what kind of system exists where 3 people who knew in their heart that what was happening was wrong hesitated? And I think what they saw was a man who had gotten away with murder lots of other times in other forms. They had to ask themselves, as a fellow cop, if I intervene now, when it comes time for me to need help, am I going to get the backup I need? That's a hard discussion we have to have about a network that is inbred into law enforcement. I do believe in community oversight, but let me just say we have to be careful about turning everything over to community policing. Community policing is what happened to Trayvon Martin. Community policing is what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. And we have to be very careful in our terminology now and in how we redefine things. We can't just give ourselves over to the emotion of the moment. We've got to be thinking long term. So that's just about 6, about 20 things that I'd like to see enacted. But I think action that cannot be gradual. This is not gradualism. We don't need incrementalism. We need broad, sweeping reform. And I think this is the moment to have it. And if we elect status quo, if we re-elect what we currently have, we're not going to see the needle move.
Right. So, Jade, here, Rho and I are both in Columbia, which is Richland County, South Carolina. And of course, we had statewide primaries last week. We've got runoffs next week. But interestingly enough to me, especially as a, I guess, quote, seasoned community or political person, is looking at the amount of change that we saw with this past election. So with our county council, we had two incumbents defeated, two incumbents who are facing a runoff for their seat next week. And so, you're looking at a lot of folks who just want to be part of the solution and the change. Can you tell us, when you think about change, what are the changes that you think your leadership would bring to the system that people are so frustrated with?
Yeah, it's twofold. I have an ulterior motive in this run. And we saw it literally from the minute that I announced in a public audience that I was running, is people felt convicted. They said, if this lady who's never had a political office is taking the wholeness of who she is, looking at an inventory of her skills, gifts, talents, and abilities, and deciding to run for the highest office in the land, what have I been sitting on that I have not moved on yet? What is the world still waiting for me to produce? And so there hasn't been a day, Tameika, where people don't say, because of what you're doing, I'm now doing the thing I was supposed to be doing. That's the ulterior motive to this run, that people will operate in higher purpose. They will finally move on the things that they are called to do because the world is waiting on solutions. The change you mentioned, it was hard for me just to sit here and not scream out loud, because it means that people are looking in the mirror and saying, why not me? And the question, when I used to compete in pageants, one of my incredible trainers always said, why you, why now? You can answer those two questions, you always win, because you'll know why you're doing what you're doing. And so I think the change is great because people are saying, why not me? Why not now? In terms of the change that I would want to bring, I think, first of all, leadership does, the tone of leadership trickles down. So a lot of those reforms, I know enough to know that they don't always come from the national office. We talked before we got online about just the re-education that's needed right now amongst our people. One of the things that I would love to be known for is being the president of the US at its most informed, with its most informed population. You're not going to see someone who wants to withhold information or shape the information and make it look good. Because I know that if I'm good at heart, I don't have to rewrite the narrative. I can just let things play out. I can say the hard things and the chips will have to fall where they may. So one of the big changes you're going to see is transparency in communication. I also believe now that we need to see leadership that has a servant's heart in place. One of the big changes you'll see under me is a prioritization of people over profit every single time. So when we talk about the current president and people say, I had no idea this is how he was going to be. Well, that's not true. If we look at the past of how the current president ran his businesses, we'll see a very similar pattern in how he runs government. If you look at the deals, he was a deal maker, but the deals were always lopsided. Why are we bailing out corporations, which I refuse to demonize, by the way, but why are we bailing out corporations and not asking more of them? You want corporations to come back stateside, you want them to repatriate. What's the incentive going to be? You have a president that's telling his base, bring American jobs back, but behind their backs, he's signing tax bills that incentivize them to keep their profit abroad, make their profit abroad. See, we don't need that kind of misinformation and that kind of fingers crossed behind the back leadership. So when you prioritize people every time, that means that when you look at, for instance, the stimulus bills that we just had to pass in order to help Americans, we have to be honest now about what recovery looks like. You know, they're trying to convince us it's a V-shaped recovery. It's not. It's going to be a long recovery. We have to be able to tell American people, look, when we keep doing stimulus, you know what else that means? Inflation is on the way, right? And so when we look at the ways that we prioritize relief now, we have to make sure that we're not just helping a sliver of the population. And that's what we saw with the way that the stimulus bills played out. I believe we also need a season now of more innovation, more collaboration, and reinvention. Our nation needs to reinvent now. Here's what's ironic. We're not really reinventing into something new. We need to finally become what we say we've always been. One nation, under God, indivisible. We're at our most divided right now. We should be concerned that our enemies are seeing us and they've exposed all of our weak spots. The way to beat the US is to divide and conquer, because right now our instinct is us versus them in every way. Even this amazing moment we have right now is turning into law enforcement versus civilian, black versus white, red versus blue. And so we keep losing opportunity to find common ground that's going to serve more people. So you're looking at a presidency that would seek common ground, would seek opportunity for unity, and would be looking for possibility for as many Americans possible, not just playing to one side or one base.
If you're just joining us, we've been having a powerful discussion with independent presidential candidate Jade Simmons. It's been absolutely amazing. We're going to take a brief commercial break. Yeah, we're going to take a brief break here, and we're going to come back. And listen, if you have any questions, please post those in the comment section, because we want to give you an opportunity to pose your questions. The thing that's really powerful about this virtual experience is you're not in a crowd, you're not competing with other people. You get an opportunity to ask the questions up front and personal. One of the things that she told us from the very beginning, Jade said, I want this to be the real deal. No question is off the table. So we're going to get into some more of those hot topics after this commercial break.
You see, what we're really wrestling with, and we cannot forget this, what we're really wrestling with is not flesh and blood. We're really wrestling with a spirit of division. And that spirit has permeated our nation to the point where we're at risk for losing our identity, at risk of losing our way, and at risk of losing our birthright as the nation called to do the big, bold things that no other nation on this earth can do.
Awesome. And we are back. I'm Roshanda Pratt here with my lovely co-host, Tameika Devine, and we are having such a great conversation with independent presidential candidate, Jade Simmons. Her information is scrolling right there at the bottom of the screen, www.operationrestoration2020.com. And man, it has been absolutely powerful. Tameika, any comments or words?
It has just been awesome. I will say that, everyone who follows me knows that I'm very passionate about the role that we all play in our political system, whether you're an elected official, you're appointed official, or a citizen, a child that's not even able to vote yet. We all have a role to play. But that role starts with understanding and believing bigger. And I'm really excited that we are having the opportunity to introduce people to Jade Simmons who might not know Jade. Jade is a 2020 independent running for president of the United States. She is an amazing woman of faith, a world-renowned classic pianist, a transformational coach and speaker that believes in reinvention, but mainly believes in the power of believing bigger. And so she's been sharing with us a lot of her platform as to what has led her to run for president at this very pivotal time in our country's history, but also what she brings to the table that everyone needs to at least just understand so we know our options. This is not about, as she mentioned, it's not about a party. It's not about race. It's not about socioeconomic status. It's about who can actually bring vision to bring this country together and bring this and lead us into moving forward. And so excited to have you here, Jade. And I'm grateful for you taking this time to introduce yourselves to the folks that we wanted to introduce you to.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jade. I apologize. I didn't mean to overtalk.
No, I was just going to say thank you again for having me.
We have a question here from one of our audience members, Morgan Hightower. Jade, what is your stance on immigration? How do you feel about this morning's DACA decision made by the Supreme Court?
I think we need to be rejoicing. That was a win today for Dreamers. The fact that the Supreme Court blocked Trump's bid to end DACA. We're talking about making America great. How do you do that without realizing the importance, the cruciality of immigrants in this country? The first Americans, before they were called Americans, to step foot on this soil were immigrants. When you look at the history of immigration in general, whenever a people group needed to survive, they moved. That's what immigration is. I believe we must keep our borders open to those who are looking for refuge, who are looking for rescue. I don't think that to say that means that you don't want order at the border. I believe that, God is a God of order. So we must also always be looking to see where can we implement better systems. Our current immigration system is broken. We have to make sure that those who have gone through the process, who are doing things the so-called right way, are prioritized. But I do not believe, first of all, in the demonization of immigrants. The language that has been used to talk about people who have been trying to get into this country is abhorrent. And I believe as a Christian, we must remember they're all humankind. These are not invaders. These are not foreigners. And even if you think of them as foreigners, one of my favorite Bible figures is David. And I remember him praying to ask God, how do I take care not just of my people, the Jewish people, but of all of the foreigners and the resident aliens who come to our land? So you're looking at a future president who would believe in serving immigrants, but who would also look at revamping systems to make sure that, first of all, when we talk about criminal activity at the border, we're talking about criminals, not just people looking for passage. So I think those are some important things that we have to do. I think we better look at this Supreme Court. They are not handing down the decisions that I think this administration thought they were going to hand down. That's powerful. Someone asked me earlier, how would I go about picking Supreme Court justices? Listen, you must have balance. There must be. You should never want to be in a room where everybody thinks like you, where everybody votes like you, and everybody agrees with you. The Supreme Court should always be wrestling with their decisions, because their decisions determine how we treat people in this nation. So I'm excited about the decision today on a number of levels, but also because I think American people need to know that our institutions like the Supreme Court are not rigged, that we have judges who are thinking for themselves and coming to conclusions they feel is best, whether or not it jives with their party alignments.
Now we're going from talking about DACA to more about your role when it comes to Breakthrough for Black America. You have a plan that's called Breakthrough for Black America. Can you explain to us a little bit about what that plan is?
Yeah, you know, I'd be lying if I told you when I decided to run back in January, when we made it official, that I knew COVID-19 was about to do what it did, that I knew that the George Floyd murder would take on the legs that it has in our country. I didn't see that coming. I'd be lying if I pretended to foresee all of that. But the fact that it is happening now confirms all the reasons that my family and I decided that now was the time. We always felt like race relations would be a number one issue, that it wasn't getting the attention it needed. And so you see that we're called Operation Restoration, and much of that restoration revolves around fixing the damage done because of the division. So Breakthrough for Black America, I want people to understand, I understand that even as an African-American president, I am and look forward to being president for all people. But I think the other role of the president is to be a champion for underserved demographics. And I don't think we can argue any longer that African Americans have historically been underserved. So I have a plan called Shades of Breakthrough. You're going to see breakthrough for Native Americans, breakthrough for immigrants, breakthrough for small businesses, another underserved population, breakthrough for farmers, another group that they have been martyrs during this administration. But I also have a plan for Breakthrough for Black America. And I said earlier, the dangerous thing we could do here is to give into gradualism and to settle for crumbs. If this ends, at compelling statements being released by our favorite companies, and they don't actually reform their systems to be able to embrace, welcome, and appreciate minority employees, then we've lost. If this ends in, I call it sash solidarity, with everybody in their kente cloth, striking a power pose, that's a symbolic moment. And that's it. And I think African Americans have already suffered enough under symbolism only. That's why we still, on our t-shirts, you only see Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. We haven't had the occasion to allow other Black leaders to really rise to this place of action and not just symbolism. And so my breakthrough plan, I have to warn people, is called Breakthrough for a reason, because it's not incremental. I think we now need to have our own version of the Marshall Plan. For those of you who don't know what that is, back in the day, the US went in as caped heroes and saved Western Europe. We invested about $12 billion, which would equal about $120 billion today. We wanted to help them revitalize their economy, increase European prosperity, remove barriers to trade. So it behooves us now. If we can invest that much in Western Europe, We should also invest in our own nation in terms of increasing prosperity for African Americans. And you heard me say earlier, I believe we have to look at reform in education as well. And so we're releasing plans starting tomorrow on Juneteenth. Everybody hopefully knows what that is, because this is another thing that's long overdue. So I'm releasing a series of plans that deal mostly tomorrow with education reform. One of the big things that I believe we have to have there, talk about symbolism, we have to do away with the limited symbols we've been giving our children. We've limited the Black experience to slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, chronic poverty. That's taught in our history books. Yet you want to ask about Black on Black crime, but you don't want to talk about that psychological, institutionalized belief that we are inferior. That creates a lot of the issues we're seeing now. So you'll see a lot of programs that revolve around educational reform, everything from changing our history curriculum to reforming the Head Start program, which no longer really serves as a Head Start. I do believe we need to look at now college loan forgiveness as well, especially, and this would go for all students who go into the fields of healthcare, education, and criminal justice. Science already proves that when we have more Black faces in those fields, it's going to serve more Black people better. I think we have to, when we have loan forgiveness in those areas, require as a part of that payback that we have doctors, lawyers, and teachers who work in our communities. That's how they pay back the debt. I think we should look at entrepreneurial charter schools in underserved neighborhoods. We now are teaching our kids backwards education system. We're still teaching by rote. What did we need during COVID-19? We needed critical thinking. We needed entrepreneurial minds at work. But we're still teaching our children for an education that would help them be successful in the 50s, maybe. And so we need reform there. I believe entrepreneurial charter schools would be great because we need financial literacy in our community. And I love that banks are coming out and saying they stand with Black people. I need to see now more loans going to Black people, greater home assistance going to Black people. I'm one of the small businesses who did not get their loan as promised after this stimulus. It took us quite a while. So here I was wanting to serve my employees and having to figure out what that looked like during COVID-19. Yet so much of that stimulus money went to major corporations who could have gotten the money on their own. And so it's that kind of lopsidedness that we have to see written out. You'll also see plans for police reform, law enforcement reform, as well as economics as well. So this is a well-rounded plan. I call it, it's really a new American dream that we're working towards, but it's going to require a new American revolution first. And that's not a bloody revolution. I keep saying, you know, I think it was Pete Buttigieg that really upset me. He took that word back and really made it a bad word. He said, I think he was comparing Trump and Biden, and he said, we can't settle for the nostalgia of Trump. And Sanders. He said, in the revolution of Sanders. And suddenly revolution was a bad word. Revolution is in the DNA of American history. It's always served us when it was time to course correct. The good news is that we don't have to shed blood in this revolution because the blood has already been shed. When you look at the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, right, the Sandra Blands, the blood has already been shed. So we get the luxury of starting now from a place where we can just focus on the change, the restorative practices now. That's what revolution gets to mean for us.
Jade, we're getting a lot of people who are chiming in, who are agreeing with what you're outlining. We have teachers in here who say they agree with what you're saying about the historical context. Adrian Young is watching A New American Dream. Love the entrepreneurial schools. We're seeing those comments and you're getting lots of hearts and thumbs up. This is what I want to talk about in regards. You talked about this breakthrough and you named certain sectors of society. You talk about African Americans. You talked about farmers. Right. But we know that even with you outlining that this breakthrough is available for all Americans, that people sometimes will only hear the fact that this is a breakthrough plan for Black America. What do you say to people who are just honing into the fact of, is this just for Black people?
Yeah.
Where do I follow? Is she just the Black president? What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I would say talk to President Obama about how that worked out. You know, you don't get the luxury of being just the Black president. I think when you look at the history of every president, they have served a certain demographic uniquely. The irony is, I think with President Obama, who I liked President Obama, but I think if we look at just the proof in the pudding, the demographics that benefited maybe the most from his presidency were immigrants, DACA, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. I still think we're waiting for a breakthrough for Black Americans under a presidency. I know people are going to say our first Black president was really Bill Clinton, but really that was more a victory for working class in general. And I think here's the luxury of this moment. Because you now, for better or for worse, like it or not, because you now have white Americans agreeing that systemic racism is an issue, agreeing that Black Lives Matter, you have a moment to push forth policy and proposals that will uniquely affect Black America. Here is the great news, though. We know this from, I think it was an experiment called the curb cut effect. There's a book written about it. Whenever we make an improvement for people who are underserved, everybody benefits. The GDP would increase if Black Americans were more prosperous, if Black Americans had more businesses, right? So you're always going to see a great effect. The curb cut effect is this theory, try to make it in a nutshell. There were people who were disabled who needed the curbs, on our streets to be cut so they could get up, use it like a ramp to get onto the sidewalk. So now when you walk on the sidewalks, you see that ramp built into the concrete. We built that for people who had wheelchairs. You know who else benefited? Moms who were rolling around with strollers. Yeah. People who had strollers. You know who else benefited? Bike riders benefited. That wasn't why we put the curb cut in. We put it in because it was literally a necessity for people who had disabilities that disabled them from being able to get up and down off of the sidewalk. But everybody benefited. I believe that when we pay attention to the Native American who got here first, by the way, I think they got to be like, hey, can we have a discussion at some point? We're going to see everybody benefit. When you deal with suicide and alcoholism in the Native American community, when you help them make sure that, talk about just having the facts they need to make the improvements they need to make in their own community. We disabled them from knowing how COVID was affecting their community. They didn't have the numbers because they're not recognized as sort of a government agency. They didn't have the same information. That's deadly for them. You understand? So think about it. If we served our homeless community, you're going to lessen the spread of COVID-19. But we didn't think about that while they were all on the streets not being served in those first few weeks of the outbreak. We have to decide now to serve people before we're forced to, before we don't have a choice. That's been our MO. There's a saying that says, America always does the right thing, but we always do it too late. So what if now it becomes that's not our MO, that we look and we say, who needs breakthrough? Who needs breakthrough? If our farmers had breakthrough, you wouldn't, and our supply chain had breakthrough, you wouldn't see food bank shelves being 75% empty in our greatest time of need. So, people, you're talking to the Black girl who is often the only one in the room. I could stand here and easily say, being Black is easy. All you have to do is study hard, go to the best schools, Northwestern and Rice University, play classical music, Bach, Beethoven, and Chopin. And then you too can be successful like me. That's all I have to do. I could say that. I could sit here and say that, and all of my Black privilege, which there is such a thing, that would be wrong to limit all of Black America to my experience with two parents, one a civil rights activist who knows the system, another who worked in higher education, who said, Jade, every time you hear the names of the top 3 students in your class, we were obsessive compulsive learners. I was number 12. We knew everybody's GPA. She said, whenever you heard those top 3 names, go to the office too. And every time I heard Kathy, Alex, and Jennifer, I won't say their last names, I went to the office. We're good friends. I went to the office too. You know what was happening in the office? They were being offered scholarship opportunities because they were in the top 3. Because I was ranked number 12, it was assumed I wouldn't be eligible. I ended up having the most scholarships in the history of my high school. That's because I had the privilege of a mother who knew how the system worked. She knew how bias worked. And so I had that advantage. Everyone does not have the same advantages. And so we have to build a system that provides advantage for more people. And the good news is we all benefit at the end of the day.
Thank you, Jade.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Just powerful. Because you bring so much everybody wants to talk about being their authentic self, but a lot of folks are not authentic and are not willing to lay it out. But you've laid it out in such a powerful way. So, as we talked before, our sister circle, we were going to keep it real here. So let me ask you that. I know that our listeners are wondering. They're probably hearing what you're saying, liking what you're saying, and saying, okay, she sounds great, but really, does she really think she's gonna beat Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever ends up being out there when nobody really knows her? So, kind of real talk. What is your plan to get out there for people to know who you are, and what's your plan to victory? Because I know you, and Rho and I both know that you wouldn't put yourself and your family out there if you didn't have a plan to be victory. I mean, some people run for attention. Yeah. You're not running for attention. You're running because you want to make change. But to make the change you want to see, you got to win. Yeah. So what's your plan to win this thing?
So let's talk politically, strategically, because a lot of people just don't even understand what the path of an independent is. People were saying, Jay, we like you, but we didn't see you on our primary ballot. Well, that's because I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, so you wouldn't have seen me in the primaries. People are worrying, how are you going to win the Electoral College as an independent? Well, as an independent, I get to choose my electors. And so they register with me when I file in each state. And when I win the popular vote in South Carolina, then my electors cast their vote for me, just like you would have for a Democrat or Republican. So it is literally legally feasible. We're running in 42 states as a registered write-in. And people go, oh, I didn't know write-in was a real thing. Well, if you just go write Mickey Mouse in, that's not going to work. If you write in Bernie Sanders, that also won't count because he's not a registered write-in. He was a registered Democrat for the purposes of this election. So we're registered in all of those states so that when you go and write in Jade Simmons, that vote counts. I can win the popular vote in that state, just like any other candidate, and get the electors just like any other candidate. So it is literally legally possible. This is not a symbolic run. Now, what I am going to be honest about and tell you, this is the hardest thing ever to do. Third-party candidates have never done well. They've usually served only to split the vote, which is what everybody yells at me about. But I believe a couple of things, and I know I can say this because I know who your audience is. With God, all things are possible. And if this is the moment that he has designed for sweeping change, then nothing can be against this moment. Literally speaking, if all the people who said, I like you, but were to vote for me, we'd win in a landslide. If the evangelicals and Christians who are feeling now that they can no longer back a president that operates in no fruit of the spirit, looks nothing like the scripture they profess to believe, and resembles Jesus not in the least bit, if all of those on the right decided they wanted a different option, but they couldn't go as far left as maybe what's being offered on the left, they would vote for me. If those on the left who say, listen, I believe in humanitarian issues, we've got to serve the underserved. But, my faith is feeling a little bit under attack over here. If we're being honest about the Christianity in this country, I'm open about my faith. That was risky because of how Christians themselves have been demonized and silenced in this country. So those on the left who feel that way also find a home in us. We believe that the majority of Americans are not Democrat or Republican. The majority of Americans are technically unaffiliated. They're independent. And or they haven't registered to vote. And so for us, voter registration is huge. Many of the people who like me say, I've never voted before, but now I want to. Or I'm registered, but I was not going to vote this year because I'm tired of choosing the lesser of two evils. But now we see you. We have Hispanic pastors who are finding us and saying, finally, a voice that truly speaks what they feel is the heart of God and will want to line up with the will of God. So we believe, numerically speaking, if everybody actually voted their heart, voted their conscience, and was listening to the three voices running, and really there's a lot more than three, but the three voices we're talking about here, if they were to listen in and say, not who is Jade and can she win, but who do I want in a leader? And does she line up? If all of those people decided to vote for me, we would win very easily. The key now, Tameika, will be, are people willing to leave these hard rock party lines? The people who come at me, who come hard for me on Facebook, I always ask them, just be careful and make sure that the people that you're backing so hard actually have your back. Make sure these sides you holding up so hard really are going to be on your side. And when people do their research and they hear what we're talking about, they see their heart in my heart. If everyone who saw that voted for me, it's not a risk. It's absolutely a sure thing. So I'm excited to watch things work. We didn't know we didn't know COVID-19 was going to look like this. We didn't know George Floyd was going to happen. I think there are a lot more surprises in store. If people want to help us, there are a couple of different ways. Spread the word. We are experiencing an intentional media out, ladies. Intentional. Fox News is like, she sounds too Christian. We can't have her on here. On the left, it's like, wait a minute, we work really hard to line everybody up behind Biden. We can't give someone shine who might disrupt that. So you're looking at an intentional disruptor. We're excited about some news coverage that's coming, and we believe the cat's going to be out of the bag in a big way. But if people can help us spread the word, we know that the rest is organic and it's very natural.
I love that, Jade.
We do have down on here. I think Rose put up the link. There is something very specific you need to be on the ballot in South Carolina.
That's right. There are 8 states that do not allow write-in status. And so they require us to gather signatures to be on the ballot. And one of those states is my home state of South Carolina. We need 10,000 signatures. If you go to the link that you see right there, you can help us in one of 2 ways. The great way you can help us is you get the ballot, you sign it for you get the petition, you sign it for yourself, and you'll send it to our representative. That would be awesome. What would be more awesome is you download that petition and you also get others to sign. The only requirement is that you're a registered voter. You're not voting for me by signing this, not yet. What you're doing is saying, if this lady is running, we deserve to have her on our ballot. So when the time comes and we get to make our decision, we're actually making a true decision between all of the options. That's what signing means. And so we need a lot of help in this area. South Carolina has one of the higher numbers, and our governor is not budging in terms of, we really want to help keep people safe. And so some states are doing away with the signature requirement because they're concerned about people being out knocking on doors. So we're doing a lot of this electronically. We'd love to have you on the team, help us do this, and we'd love to have you sign for me as well.
Jade, there's been a couple of discussions here in the comment section. You guys, thank you for taking screenshots of the link and sharing. Plenty of people have asked for a yard sign. They love what you're sharing. Let's go back to the media piece for a moment, because that was brought up on why you haven't been in the major networks and what is it that we can do, the people who are watching, who can help you get there. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
I'm laughing. I'm looking at some of the comments. Somebody knows about my rap career because they got one of my rap lines that get out of my shine, Ryan. But I'm also laughing because my mom, when we first got started, was like, so why don't we just call CNN? I'm like, Mom, I don't have Don Lemon on speed dial. It doesn't quite work like that. What I think we were shocked by, I will say I was naive a little bit. I knew that we would have a hard climb when getting exposure was concerned, but I thought at the end of the day, me carry a story that they thought was a worthy story. We had people tell us to our face, oh no, don't cover independence. And then we had a producer say, we're not covering her. She's a distraction. She is going to mess up what we're trying to do. Well, the media is not supposed to be trying to do anything. And they were open about it. And that was a Black producer, actually, who said that. So we are seeing a pretty intentional shutout for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But we encourage people, for instance, BET, maybe they have canceled it. They were going to do a special on Juneteenth. They invited the president and Vice President Biden to talk about race relations. And I was kind of like, hey, probably should have one other person on that discussion who's also running for president. Again, the daughter of a civil rights activist from Charleston, South Carolina. And so we're seeing people having to decide in media whether or not they're going to cover a story because it's a worthy story, or whether they're going to risk being the person who gave some shine to someone who might disrupt everybody's plans. If there was ever a time to have plans disrupted, it is now. So we urge everyone to contact your local media and tell them, hey, we heard there's another option. How come we didn't hear it from you? Again, green matters. Black and white, we think, is the big deal. Green matters. If one network runs the story, all of the others follow because nobody wants to be left out. So we're looking for the big break where that is concerned. We're also excited about some things coming up where international media is concerned. But wouldn't it be a shame for BBC to cover it before CNN does? So help us make the push. Let your networks know that there's another option. You want them to present it to you.
We have a question here in the comments section. Adrian asked, how can we get Jade on our platforms for more visibility? People want to know what they can tangibly do.
Yeah, what you're doing right here is powerful. The other thing we have been offering, which, there's an incredible opportunity because of COVID to innovate like never before. It's called Meet the Candidate, where anybody can have me come talk to their inner circle, behind the scenes, private virtual discussion, and they have yielded so much fruit. If you're interested in hosting a Meet the Candidate, you can do it for your personal circle of friends and family. If you have platforms of your own, I first of all appreciate you trusting me with them. You'll get pretty much what you're seeing here. People have been asking us questions. You're going to email info@operationrestoration2020.com, and we would love. Melissa Nixon is in the comments. Text MTC to 33777. And that way you can bring me right there into your living room to talk to all your friends and family, and just share the content that we put out. But don't just share it. Put in the caption why you're sharing it. Your followers, your people trust you. They don't know me from Adam for the most part. So when you say, I'm sharing this, like as Jacoby said, I love it. They said there's a void in leadership. I believe we're listening to someone who has the potential to fill that void. You put that at the caption at the top of one of our videos, that's going to get more clicks and listen tos than if you just post my face that they don't recognize. So we love that people are taking this on themselves. This is why we love the idea of being a write-in as well. There's nothing more American than saying, you know what? I don't like them options. Here's what I want. We have this rebel DNA that works for us and against us. We saw it in COVID-19. You're not going to tell me to stay home. You're not going to tell me to come out my house, right? It's like whatever you're going to tell us what to do. And so I think being an independent is the personification of that. You don't get to just stuff down our throats two options we don't really believe in. If there are more options, we demand to hear from them. And if we feel they are the right fit, we will vote for them as well. So we feel like this candidacy, this campaign is also about empowering the American people to take back their choices.
I love it. Jade, we're coming right here up on an hour, and this has been a really great dialogue and conversation. And I'm on the line here with two very active women in the political process. So I know that you guys have things going on. Yeah. But Tameika, want to yield you any final comments? And then Jade, we want to give you the opportunity to end the broadcast speaking directly to the American people.
Okay.
Tameika?
Well, thank you. It has indeed been my honor to be here with you ladies. I could sit here and talk to you ladies about anything because I just love being here around with you guys. And unfortunately, COVID has limited our opportunity to interact personally, because I usually see Jada, I usually see you about once a year, and Rho, I see you a lot, but we don't get to do that. But the positive thing about this is we're able to do things like this. And, everyone knows that, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, I was able, Jamie and I were able to host many of the presidential candidates as they came in. And I know some people probably was like, oh, this is for show or whatever. No, it really was for people to hear from the candidates, because I felt like so many candidates had some good things to hear, but because they might not have been, a Joe Biden or, someone else, they weren't given that opportunity to share their message. And so to be able to help Jade share her message is very important, because we've got to be an informed electorate. We've got to challenge our current elected officials, our folks who want to be elected officials. We need to see if they really have the heart of service, and we need to understand what is their plan for really serving those of us who need more than what we've been offered. And so I would just say that, if you've heard something here, share it, tell people about Jade, learn more, make your decision. Don't let anybody tell you who you should be voting for. That's why I don't do a whole lot of endorsements. Y'all see that. I don't want people to say, I voted for this person because you told me to. I want you to make that decision. So I hope that you guys have heard something. I thank you, Jade, because it takes a lot to serve and to offer yourself for service. You are like Rho and I. You have kids that you could be doing a lot. But you know, and you're doing, and you've got a fabulous business that has been growing over the last many years. And so there's so many other things that you could be doing that is for Jade.
Yeah.
But we know that this is your heart, and you being obedient to what God has told you to do, and to offer yourself to this country. So I thank you for offering yourself. I thank you for allowing Rho and I to interview you today. And God bless you, sister. I love you so much. And I thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to talk with you.
I
Definitely
thank you
rallying
both.
our prayers around you.
Thank you both. The prayers are necessary. You mentioned I have 2 little ones. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, also from Charleston. We're Geechee for life. But, you know, I think about what you were saying about, you know, that I could be doing other things. And as inspired as I am to be stepping into this moment, I have to be honest and say it was an interruption. You know, this is not how my 2020 was supposed to look. I had planned. But what I am realizing is that a much needed disruption is worth the interruption. So I'm asking people to consider what needs to be disrupted in our nation, what needs to be disrupted in our mindset, what needs to be disrupted in our modes of operation. And don't just ask yourself, who is Jade? What is she? What is she trying to do? I always say, make a list of what you want to see in leadership. What do you want leadership to sound like? What do you want it to look like? What do you want it to commit to? And what do you want it to avoid at all costs? And if you see those characteristics, those traits, that potential in me, all I'm asking is that you consider disrupting what you've always done, disrupting the way you've always voted in favor of a very necessary disruption that we need in this moment. This is an Isaiah 60 moment to me. This is a rise and shine moment. You'll see me put hashtag New America Arise, because this is a moment where I feel individuals like never before have tremendous power to be instruments of light and salt on this earth. And we must now be the examples of that. And I think one of the first things we have to do is to decide to do something differently all the way at the top. So I just thank everyone in advance for seriously considering. Don't just blow it off because you're afraid of the other side. That's what we get a lot of. People say, we just got to get Trump out of there, so you're messing everything up. It's not just about who you want to get out. It's not just about who you want to vote against. It's who do we want in? Who do we want working for us? And when you ask that question and you decide what the answer should be, I humbly ask that you look at me and see if I fit that bill. But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Rho and Tameika, for having me. I will end by saying this. This is, we said we're going to keep it really real. Some of my most vocal cheerleaders have been people who've never heard of me, or who may have heard me speak one time and felt like they got their whole life in that 45-minute presentation. Some of the people who have been the most negative are people who look just like me, and they are women. And I have to ask myself, wow, where is that coming from? Here I am offering myself up, I feel like, to finally represent groups that haven't had a voice. And I think sometimes when we look at people doing wild things and we can't imagine ourselves doing it, we assume their motives are not in the right place and that they're not really working for us. So I just encourage us not to be moved just by how everyone looks, but to look now at the heart of the people that are vying to serve you and see if their heart matches yours, and then make your decision accordingly.
Jade, thank you so much for this hour of your time. It has been powerful, impactful. You have definitely laid it out there on the line. Want to remind everybody, make sure to go to the website, www.operationrestoration2020.com. Make sure to go to that website so that way you can stay connected to Jade. If you feel so inclined to support her, make sure to go over there. Make sure to follow her across social media, Operation Restoration 2020 as well. Jade, thank you so much for being here. It would be awesome in November to call you Madam President. That would be absolutely awesome. Thank you for being here. To
Thank
my
you
dear
so much.
friend, Tameika Isaac Devine, always a pleasure to be in the same space with you. Thank you, ladies, so much. You guys make sure that you share, invite, start a replay, share this information out, continue to tag people so that way we could flood social media with this information. You guys, thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.